Again, we're continuing and finishing actually up to date, talking about these gifts that God has for us and for our relationships. And the last one I wanted to touch on is the gift of spirituality. And frankly, when I first read that, I thought to myself, how is spirituality a gift to our relationships? Because I first thought it's, kind of that relationship you have with God. That's the spirituality piece. But then I began to think a little bit more and remembered how, as I work with young parents who come with that new little baby, brand new to the font for baptism, and we have that conversation. The first is especially first-time parents. They are just head over heels in love with this precious little gift, right? And they have this sense of knowing, whether they know God well or not, that they have just experienced a miracle, and that they are now part of something bigger than themselves. And whether they know God well or not, they have this understanding that this bigger God has been the one to bless them. And they are feeling that gratitude, that overwhelming gratitude and recognition of how precious this life is. And then as we begin to talk about what baptism means and how inviting them to raise this child to know this amazing God who has blessed them, and the journeys and the highs and lows that this child will go through, they start to get nervous about that parenting thing, right? And then I get to say, but God has promised to be with your child when you cannot, to comfort them and to guide their life. And every time I get this sort of, that's good news, because this can be really overwhelming of this responsibility. Well, I share this with you because I want to zero in on what is the most precious thing, and I think it is our spirituality that remind us of it. As we heard those two parables, they're inviting us to focus in and to pay the close attention to what is the most valuable thing for us. And it is our people in our lives. And it is this understanding that we have as people of faith that God loves each of us so deeply and sincerely. So much He gave His Son to die for us, right? Go back and read Psalm 139. Goes on to say, God has made me so wonderful. He knit me together in my mother's womb, and He has made me just as I am. And to feel that love of how special and important you are to God. Well, I think the gift of spirituality is that we have people in our life that are going to keep reminding us of how we are God's child, loved and beloved, and that we have that gift to remind each other of how much God deeply loves them. So as we unfold this, how spirituality impacts relationship, I thought of three things. So here's my 3-point message for you. I'm going to give you the intro to it. It's this. A healthy spiritual life is going to give us this perspective that what God puts people in our life for a purpose. That's thinking spiritually, isn't it? Secondly, that each person we meet is uniquely gifted by God. God made them just the way they are. And the third is, when we bring prayer to our relationships, something very dynamic and exciting is going to happen. The Bible talks about it, a threefold cord, right? That there's something really powerful when God is in the relationship we have with someone else. So let's go back. God puts people in our life for a purpose. Do you think about that? To just think spiritually about the encounters. Certainly the people are with you and have been with you for a long, long time. Your church family, for example, your family. But also that God drops people into your life. And to think about, why does God have me meet this person at this time in my life? Maybe you know this old story. It's about the man who is caught in a flood. He climbs up onto the roof of his house, right? And he prays to God, God, deliver me. I don't want to drown. And he prays and prays. And suddenly there's a couple in a boat that come by, right? Say, come on down, get in the boat. And he goes, nope, God's going to deliver me, right? And then the helicopter flies over and they drop a ladder and they say, get on the ladder, we'll save you. And they're like, nope. God's going to save me. Well, what do you know? The flood waters keep coming. It gets washed away. He dies. He goes to heaven, and he says, God, why didn't you deliver me? And God said, I tried, right? I sent the boat, and I sent the helicopter. Maybe you know that story, but it is a good reminder that when we are praying to God for things in our life, that it's going to be probably a person that's going to drop into your life, that God's going to work through that person. Think of the teachers you've had in your life, or the mentors who've mentored you in your career or in your daily life, that God has put them in your life for a purpose. I'm thinking of sometimes there's a person that just did one thing that made such a difference to change the outcome of your life. Just last year, going through my father's things, he's been deceased, still sorting through pictures and things you pull out of his dresser drawer. There was a letter that he had saved for years and years and years. It was written by our next door neighbor to my dad about one of my brothers, who this neighbor had recommended my brother to receive a job at the company he worked for in our little hometown. And my brother apparently had been working for them for about a year, and the neighbor wrote to my dad and said, oh, we just love having your son. He's doing a great job, and we're just really pleased for him. And I thought, my brother now has been in this company for over 30 years. He's had a career, he's been able to support his family, and it's changed their life. But I thought to myself, why did my dad save this letter? Maybe because he saves everything, I don't know, but I think maybe because it meant a lot. He saw in that action of a neighbor that he had blessed my brother and our family by giving him that opportunity. And my dad saw that year after year after year as my brother would continue in that company. Little things, sometimes one thing someone has done to change your life and bless you. Think of the healers that have come into your life. I mean, yeah, doctors and medical professionals and therapists, but what about that volunteer at the hospital that escorted your wheelchair to the next appointment where you had another test, and they brought that positive spirit and joy to just either listen to you or to just check in with you, that they blessed your day that day, right? Or the people who listen to you, how they help you. Maybe it's someone that just comes into your life to make you laugh, right? That they just showed up, or there's someone that's always able to do that. I thought I'd share a little story about one of your former pastors. Scott and Chris Raffato served here. I went to seminary with them. And it'll probably, as I think of them and appreciate their ministry and their life, maybe you know this about Scott. He's got a wicked sense of humor. And he was the guy, he was the class clown in seminary when we're all like studying Greek and systematic theology and writing dozens of papers and contemplating being a pastor and guiding people in their spiritual lives. And here's Scott keeping us laughing. He had such a gift for that, and I bet he brought that here to your ministry. God puts people in our lives. What else? Well, God gifts people uniquely, and to begin to say, how is the gifts this person has blessing me or blessing our lives? Why these particular gifts? I love Pastor Frank a couple weeks ago talked about how opposites are going to attract, and then they end up getting married, right, to each other. But that there's a reason that gift is being brought to you. I think a music camp. Becky just finished that with our young children, talking about how we are all gifted very differently and all belong in community and relationships. I mean, just look at the Apostle Paul. He was such a strong leader, but as we really look at his story, and I know some of you just came back with a couple weeks talking about the Apostle Paul, he had many partners in his work. I think with Peter, the disciple, they butted heads, but it was a case of iron sharpening iron. I think they both grew stronger in their leadership because of each other. He had this couple named Priscilla and Aquila that he would sit down and they were tent makers together. And then they also would witness and share the story of Jesus Christ. Paul had young Timothy, who he mentored, and I'm sure their lives were blessed as Paul was thrilled to pass on to the next generation this life of faith in Jesus. And then sometimes we don't know what the gifts are that people are bringing into our life. It's just cannot always be very clear. I think of my friends, Dave and Ann. I went to the funeral for their son this year. He was 25. He had a form of muscular dystrophy called Duchenne, where that is about the life expectancy. And the disease is handed on by this recessive gene that his mother, Ann, gave him. So I got to be a part of their life because every year they were on fire to do a golfing fundraiser for MD. And at that event, they would do a slideshow of how the family was doing that year. And one year during that slideshow, they shared what is really a very familiar story, poem story by Emily Kingsley called Welcome to Holland. The whole gist of the story is no one dreams of going to Holland. You know, you pick like Paris, France or something. No one dreams of that. And that's what it's like having a child with a disability. You end up going to a place you never really dreamed of, right? But once you're there, you discover the gifts and the beauty and the lovely things about a place called Holland, or a life and family life with a child with disabilities. The funeral for Dave and Ann's son, it was really a celebration of life and love, and also a celebration of new life, that he was freed from this body that held him back. Other areas of giftedness, I got to tell a story about Pastor John Google. I see Linda's here. I got to work with John for 6 years as his associate pastor in Muskego. And one of the things we would do with new members was spiritual gifts assessment. You know, it's like kind of what you're good at, but we totally take advantage of the new members and recruit them there. So they have the gift of music. We'd say, you should be in our music ministry. Have skills to fix, repair things. You should be on the property committee, good at managing finances, finance committee, you know. So it was just a way to invite people into the work of the church. Well, Pastor John, here's the story. It's a nice story. He was just dying to one time break in on the all-women prayer chain group. This was his mission. You know, the prayer chain is like back when you call, it's a phone tree, you call of the prayer concerns. Now Pam just sends an e-blast and everybody gets to know what we should be praying for, what people are wanting us to pray for. Well, this one new member class, 2 men identified with the gift of prayer. And Pastor John was on fire. He recruited and said, come on, let's break in on that prayer chain. And they were all game to do it. And gender equality was had at Atonement in Muskego. Giftedness. Well, what else? God puts people in our life for a purpose. God equips us with unique gifts that we will share with each other. And finally, the power of prayer in our relationships. Alfred Tennyson, he said this: more things are wrought by prayer than anyone ever imagines. Isn't that so true? That is so true. But I'm wondering, as a person of prayer, how vocal and open are you about that? Do you tell your family, your friends, and people you meet, I'm praying for you, or can I pray for you about that? And maybe you actually would do it right then and there if it felt right, that was something to offer. Or are you able to identify when you see that the prayers have been answered, to say, I think God is really answering our prayer here. And to give witness to that. I mean, I'm not always certain of those answers, but I can say, I think this is God working in our life. We need to claim this. I tell you, that is such a gift that you will give to our younger generation, to your children and your grandchildren, and they will know you as a person of prayer. When they don't know anything else about God, they're going to know the people who are going to be praying, and they're going to find you, and they say, Grandma, Grandpa, will you pray for me about this? And it'll be really an awesome way of connecting in your relationships. We're been hearing about partnerships this summer. Our guests from El Salvador are coming. We've been hearing about a carry. One thing I have learned in these partnerships with third world countries, prayer is the best gift, the most important gift we share with them. It's not about the money you send or the things you collect and the things you give, but when there's a sense that my friends in America are praying for me, we feel the solidarity of our one faith and our one Lord, and the power of prayer, that God can hear these prayers and answer them, gets very, very exciting. I hope you feel that too, and it's quite humbling. So spirituality, it is a gift. There's no doubt about it. As we recognize what God is doing, putting people into our life for a purpose, gifting us in unique ways to be a blessing, and certainly binding us together through the power of prayer. Let's thank God for these amazing gifts for our relationships.